Parables of the Messiah by Brother John Carter. Parables of the Messiah, number 23, the Yoke of Christ. Matthew chapter 11, verse 29. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, said Jesus. Matthew 11, verse 29. It is a beautiful, interesting and instructive figure. Let us get a clear picture of what a yoke is. It was a bar which connects two of a kind, as the ox yoke, fastened by bows on the necks of a pair of oxen, and by thongs to the horns or the foreheads of the oxen. It consists generally of a piece of timber, hollowed or made curving near each end, and fitted with bows for receiving the necks of the oxen, by which means two are connected for drawing. From a ring or hook in the bow, a chain extends to the thing to be drawn. A yoke is therefore something which unites two creatures for some particular task. There can be a willing and an unwilling yoking. Therefore the yoke can be a figure of an accepted service or an imposed bondage, of joy or woe, freedom or slavery. In all these senses it was used in the Old Testament. See Jeremiah 2, verse 20, 28, Isaiah 9, verse 4, 58, verse 6, the 1st of Kings 12, verse 4, and Lamentations 3, verse 27, etc. What, then, is the meaning attached to its use by Jesus? As he looked about him, he saw men labouring under many yokes. His countrymen were subject to the Romans, which their rulers in pride tried to forget, even claiming that their race was never in bondage to any man, John 8, verse 33. They suffered under a yoke of legal observance, a yoke, as Peter said, which neither we nor our fathers were able to bear. Acts 15, verse 10. They, in common with all men, but perhaps with an acuter sense of it because of the instruction of God's law, were in bondage to sin, sold under sin, in Paul's words, Romans 7, verse 14. The Jews were also familiar with the use of the figure for instruction, the yoke of the law, the yoke of the precept, the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, signified instruction pertaining to these things. Men of Belial were men without the yoke, uninstructed men. The book of Ecclesiasticus, in an appeal to seek learning and instruction, says, "Put your neck under the yoke, and let your soul receive instruction." Turning now to the words of Jesus, he says, "Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden or load is light." It is a call to discipleship. Come to me, and learn of me. And discipleship is taking his yoke. It is entering into harness with him as fellow. It is sharing his outlook, approaching life his way, copying his meekness and lowliness of heart. Of such a character are they who learn his way. They are the babes of the preceding verses, to whom God's will and purpose are revealed. There is thus a close connection between the invitation to take the yoke and the verses immediately preceding. They form a series which many writers regard as consisting of disconnected sayings, perhaps even not Christ's words. loosely grouped together without having any real association of ideas. Careful study, however, shows that, accepted as the words of Jesus, spoken at one time, a stream of thought flows through all. The teaching of God is hidden from the wise, but revealed to babes. God has delivered all to the Son, to whom the Father is known, and through whom the Father is revealed. It is a natural sequel that Jesus invites men to learn of him and enter into the fellowship of service with him. "My yoke," Jesus said, for he was instructed in the Father's will. He had the open ear and the tongue of the learned, that I should speak a word in season to him that is weary, as Isaiah had foretold, chapter 50, verse 4. The toil of labour, the search for truth, the burden of conscience, all these can be borne when men are yoked to him. For such is the grace and wonder of it. The burdens are cast away and are not to be borne at all. Life in association with the Son of Man, yoked with him, is freed from many problems. The frets that come from pride and ambition, from desire for outward show, from self-will, are not to be found with the meek and lowly of heart. The will of God, which Jesus fully obeyed, was his yoke, which he invited man to share. He was not burdened by the heavy load of false interpretations the scribes imposed upon their followers. In his willing submission to God's will, he found the instruction of God to be good and well fitted to his shoulder, and the rest of soul that he experienced he offers to all yoke fellows. It was not a new promise. In the days of Jeremiah the message had been, "Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways, and see, and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls." Jeremiah 6, verse 16. Who is this who now takes God's words on his own lips, and in his own person offers the rest of God? It is a high claim, but not too high when we understand that the speaker is the Son of God, in whom the Father is revealed. Parables of the Messiah, number 24, Sheep in a Pit. Matthew 12, verses 11 and 12. This short parable of a sheep fallen into a pit on the Sabbath, and its recovery by the shepherd, who shows no Sabbatarian scruples about the work, presents no difficulty in its application. If men are ready to rescue an animal, it was also lawful for Jesus to heal a man on the Sabbath. But the parable acquires a deeper significance when seen in the framework of the Sabbath controversy. Towards the close of the first year of his ministry, Jesus appears to have deliberately provoked interest in his attitude to the Sabbath by healing the impotent man. John pointedly focuses attention on this by his words, "On the same day was the Sabbath." John 5, verse 9. This third sign of John's record provided Jesus with the opportunity to assert his claims as the Son, with power to perform all healing in everlasting life, according to God's will wrought through him. The Gospel of John, page 79. Within a few months the issue was raised by the Pharisees, who were watching to find fault. The disciples plucked corn and ate it as they passed through a field, an action forbidden by Jewish tradition, based on the method of interpretation of God's law so dear to the lawyers of Israel. The laws concerning the Sabbath, Exodus 20, verses 8 to 11, and 31, verses 12 to 17, inevitably sooner or later called for interpretation in their application to the details of life. The tradition of the elders gradually developed and provided what was recognized as an authorized setting out of what could and could not be done on the Sabbath. Outside Palestine, the pressure of circumstances would tend to make Jews somewhat relax the rigours of these rules. A man might follow his own religious exercises, and his association with his neighbours would not be much affected. But to stop all work every seventh day must have caused endless difficulties in work, in business, and in social life. In Palestine, with the Jews in the majority, greater importance would be attached to observing the rules concerning the Sabbath. Was not the Sabbath God's sign to them? Did not its preservation form an essential part of their witness to the true and living God? The zealous Jews in their own land were therefore fighting a battle for the faith of their fathers. We must first look at the answer of Jesus to the critics of his disciples, and then trace the significance of his action of healing and of his parable. To the rulers who found fault he said, "Have ye not read?" And he cited the action of David and those with him in eating the showbread when they were urgently in need of food. The fact that David was the Lord's anointed overruled the law which allotted the showbread only to the priests. They themselves allowed this, and so doing allowed that one law could override another. But there was something else implicit in the citation by Jesus of David's action. For if that past happening had any bearing upon the action of the disciples, those with Jesus, it could only be found in the fact that Jesus was the Son of God, the Messiah. If David was permitted to do what he did because he was the Lord's anointed, then Jesus is asserting nothing less than that his permission to his disciples to eat is based on the fact that he is the Lord's Christ. He gives a second illustration of the same principle of one law having overriding power over another law, again introduced by, "Have ye not read?" Each seventh day the priests profaned the Sabbath by the labour of offering sacrifices. Indeed, more were offered on that day than on others. In this case, the law of the offerings was superior to the Sabbath law and had precedence. But Jesus pressed the lesson still further. The law of the offerings concerned the temple service, the service of God's house. Jesus said with the emphatic introduction, "But I say unto you, that in this place is one greater than the temple." There must be some correspondence in the things compared. He was greater as the dwelling place of God. He was, in Paul's words, the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched, and not men. Hebrews 8, verse 2. After citing Hosea 6, considered in connection with Matthew 9, verse 13, he then adds, "For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." If the Son of Man is used as a messianic title, then he claims that as Messiah he is Lord of the Sabbath. Upon what basis can this be? The answer is, and it is consonant with Jewish interpretation of the Sabbath, that that day was a type of Messiah's reign. Their own interpretation of the significance of the Sabbath should have opened their minds to the meaning of the words of Jesus. More authoritative to us than their tradition is the Apostles' application of the rest of the Sabbath to the millennial rest. Hebrews 4, verse 9. If the Sabbath finds its fulfillment in the kingdom of God, then Jesus, as King of God's kingdom, is Lord of both the type and antitype. In the next incident recorded by Matthew, the claim of Messiahship is repeated. A man with a withered arm is in the synagogue, and the Pharisees, Mark adds, are there watching him. Mark also gives a fuller statement of the words of Jesus. Seeking whereby they might accuse him, the Pharisees ask, Matthew 12, verse 10, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days?" His answer, Mark 3, verse 4, is a question which enlarges the issue. Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day or to do evil? That the healing of the man would be good could not be questioned. Would they say it would be wrong to do good? But the reference to evil turns the tables. They were there expressly seeking how they might ensnare him. This was evil. Yet they found no objection to a plot for his death on the Sabbath. Their action was an inversion of the Sabbath intention, and also a hindrance to his work. They sought his death, but his mission was to give life and healing in the fullest of senses. He was angry, Mark, at the hardness of their hearts, and he said unto them, What man shall there be among you, that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. Matthew 12, verse 11 and 12. Is there some inner connection between this little story and the messianic claim involved in his teaching about the Sabbath? There would seem to be when we remember that he was the great shepherd God had promised in the messages of the prophets, and also that the figure of a pit is not infrequent in the Psalms. He brought me up out of a horrible pit. They have digged a pit for my soul. Psalm 40, verse 2 and 35, verse 7. To go down to the pit is to draw nigh unto the grave. Psalm 88, verse 3 and 4. And from this pit of death, Israel's Messiah had the power to rescue men. He united the claims to be Messiah and the resurrection when he said to Martha that he would raise up the dead at the last day, that is, in the day of Messiah. He pointed the same lesson when he raised the sick man from the pit of sickness to health on the Sabbath day. The whole controversy was brought to a focus when Jesus told them that they practiced circumcision on the Sabbath. The importance of the rite, which had its source with the fathers, though incorporated in the law, being greater than the Sabbath. Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, making a man every whit whole, prefiguring that perfect health that belongs to Messiah's Sabbath. John 7, verse 22 and 23.